Okay, so at this point, we have created our first sprite that we can bring into the game for things like platforms and whatnot. Now what we're going to do is create the sprites and flipbooks needed to have a character that is animated in our scene. So this means we are going to have to play with the flipbook asset, which is a new thing. It's really just a series of sprites played sequentially. Now, to create our sprites, let's first take a look at our textures. And here we have our idle animation. So I'm going to open this up, and if we go under View and turn on the Alpha channel, you can see how those are all cut out in the background. Now that's important to have that Alpha channel for what we're about to do. I'll go ahead and close this. There are a lot of ways we could create the sprites for each frame. Some of these you've already seen. We could right-click and create a sprite. We have 8 frames here, so we could do that 8 different times and then just adjust that source region manually and clean up all of our other different settings to make sure that each sprite lined up properly, but there are a few tools to make this kind of easier. So what I'm going to do is right-click and choose Extract Sprites, and you can see from the tooltip, this is going to extract the sprites from the selected textures using their transparency, so you have to have an alpha channel to make this happen. So we'll click, and we get 8 brand new sprites, which is pretty fancy, but it put them here in our textures folder. So really quick, while they're still selected, let's drag these into the sprites folder, and I'll choose move. Now, let's go over to the sprites folder and have a look. And I'm just going to open up any one of these. Now, our sprite list is going to show us all sprites that are using this same sprite sheet, which is going to be really useful for us. Now, it has appended numbers to the ends of these, but that's going to be a little tricky to see. So let me adjust my view options, and I'll make this a little bigger. So you can see we had idle anim atlas underscore sprite was appended, and for the next one is sprite 2, 3, 4, and so on. Now, the catch here is that it has done a really good job of extracting these out. We can show that if we take a look at the source region and zoom in a little bit. So this is the first sprite, and then we double click on sprite 2, and we can see that, and 3, and 4. But something gets a little interesting when we take a look at sprite 5. Double click it, and it jumped right to the end. It just went straight down, and now it's going to work its way backward. It's just kind of how the algorithm works at the moment. Again, new feature, kind of in an experimental state, so we're not going to give it too much grief, particularly because it did such a nice job in cutting these out. The fact that it got them in the wrong order is not that big of a deal and easy for us to fix, especially since I kind of want to rename all of these anyway. So what I'm going to do is just go sprite by sprite and rename. So the first one I will call idle underscore 1. Now, just to make this a little easier for me to see, I'm going to switch this over to a column list. And we'll double click on sprite 2. And we will name that. And now notice, I'm double clicking on it so that I can make sure to verify what region of the sprite sheet it's sampling. And we'll call this idle underscore 2. And you probably get the idea. So double click to check. And then if it's right, do idle underscore 3. Double click. Idle 4. And this is where it gets interesting. This is why we do the double click test. So 5 is actually sprite 8. So we'll call this idle underscore 8. And now we're just going to count backwards. So we'll do idle 7, idle 6, and idle 5. Okay, so now we have all of our idles. It's probably a good idea to do a really quick check, so just double click on each one and make sure that you are sampling in the proper order. And it looks like we are. Okay, so now with all that done, let's go ahead and save, and we'll close. And all of these got saved out. Now, I'm going to do the same thing with our run animation before I go any further. So let's jump over to textures. Now, if I right click here and choose extract sprites, notice it only gets one sprite. And part of that is because the alpha channel on this particular texture sheet is really, really snug. So it's having a difficult time discerning what pieces are supposed to go with what. That's okay. It just means we're going to have to do it manually. Now, to help this be a little bit easier, the first thing I'm going to do is we'll copy this over to the sprites folder. Actually, we'll move it. Don't copy it, because I want all my sprites to be over here. And I will immediately rename this. Let's call this one run underscore X. And there's a reason I'm calling it X. It's because I'm going to right-click on this new sprite, and we're going to create a copy of it. And I don't really care what it names it. That's going to be fine. Let's select both of those together, and we'll create a copy. And now we have a total of 4. We'll grab all 4 of those, right-click, and create a copy. And now we have 8. And now let's grab all 8 of those, and once again, right-click and create a copy. And now we have 16 copies of that sprite, 1 for each one of the frames in the animation. Now, I'm going to take this folder, and we're going to go under View Options, and switch this over to Columns List, and we're going to filter it by searching for Run, and that shows us all of our Run sprites. Now, I'm going to do a really quick rename here. We're just going to click on each one, and we'll do 1, 2, let's make sure, well, since they're still in a row, we won't worry that it killed out our filter. This will take just a second. This probably will go a lot faster once Bluetilities get fully implemented to the point where you can run blueprint operations on selected assets. Because if we could do that right now, I would show you how to write a renaming Blutility that would automatically serialize, but we'll just consider that a coming soon thing. We won't stress about it right now. And if you haven't fast-forwarded the video yet, then, you know, congratulations. Let's not name that 0. Let's call that 10. Probably be better. And 11. Yeah, a rules-based renamer Blutility would be pretty awesome right about now. Not that I'm complaining. Okay, so now here we go, 16. So we have 16 copies of this sprite. Let's go ahead and open any one of them, and that's fine. Now currently, they are all sampling the entire area. Now we have an advantage in the case of this image. If we go to the source region, each one of the frames is within a 256 by 256 square, making for a 1024 by 1024 texture. If you know those dimensions, you can go through and punch the numbers for the source UV and source dimension in manually. But that would require you to double-click on a sprite, set a couple of numbers, double-click on the next sprite, set a couple of numbers, and so on, which is fine if you want to do that. I'm going to do something a little bit fancier, but only slightly. We're going to select all of these sprites at the same time, 1 through 16, right-click, and go to the property matrix. This is kind of a spreadsheet that allows you to update a lot of properties all at once. And you can see we have access to the source UV and the source dimension for each one of these. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to select sprites 1 through 16, and we're going to take their source dimension and set it to 256 by 256 in both dimensions, like so. And boom, so suddenly their sample area gets smaller. Now if I pull this off to the side, let's go ahead and open up any one of these sprites. There we go. You can see that suddenly their sample region is just grabbing the northeast corner, which is great. Now let's go ahead and get those back in the property matrix. I'll make this nice and big so everybody can see. All right, so now I want to adjust the horizontal rows first, which is actually going to be adjusting the y-axis for the source UV. So let's grab 1 through 4, like so, and we will take y, and that's set to 0. That's perfect. So let's do 5 through 9. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 5 through 8. So 5 through 8, and we'll set their y to 256, which is going to be the next row down. 9 through 13. 9 through 12. It'd be great if I could actually count this stuff, wouldn't it? So 9 through 12 are going to be 512. And then finally 13 through 16 are going to be 768. Okay, so you can see if you look down the source UV, the y-axis has been updated for everybody. So now let's do the x-axis. So that would be 1, 5, 9, and 13. Just add 4 all the way down. So that would be what's in the first column. That's going to have a y of 0, which again is perfect. We shouldn't have to mess with that. Next, let's take 2, 6, 10, and 14. And those are going to have an x of the next column over, which is 256. And obviously this means that our 0 is in the upper left corner of the texture, if you're curious about that. So 3, 7, 11, and 15 will be next. So 3, 7, make sure it's actually selected 3, 7, 11, and 15. So now that all those are selected, we will set our X to 512. And then finally, we need 4, 8, 12, and 16. And we will set those to 768, like so. Okay, now it's a good idea to test this. So with all those in place, let's just, also let's save everything. So do a file, save all, make sure we don't lose anything. And once all of those get saved, we will open up any one of the sprites, and let's go to the source region. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. That is perfect. So they are all sampling the appropriate area. And that was actually pretty quick, which again, we could only do because this particular sprite sheet was busted up into some very nice, even chunks. Okay, so now we are ready to start creating some flipbooks. Oh, I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but if I didn't, let me go ahead and bring it up now. You'll notice I have not been messing with collision on these. That is because flipbooks at this time do not respect collision anyway. We're going to be using the collision of a character blueprint. So we'll actually be using a character capsule, so we don't really care about collision here. All right, so with that understood, let's go to our game folder, and I'm going to make a new folder, which I will call Flipbooks. It'll just make it easier for me to find these later. And it looks like I already had one, so we'll just delete that out, probably when I was doing a test run to make sure that this is all going to work earlier. So we'll delete that folder, and you will just pretend that I created a brand new flipbook from nothing, and we will delete this existing flipbook, and we'll pretend that we never saw that. So you and I have an understanding right now that that flipbook that was there really wasn't there. So I'm actually talking about nothing right now. So now let's go into this folder called Flipbooks we just created. We'll right click and go down to Animation and choose Sprite Flipbook, like so. And I'm going to call this the idle flipbook. We'll open it up. Now a flipbook is, just as its name suggests, it's just a stack of sprites that are going to play back sequentially, one after the other. You have control over the frames per second. You have some control over how many frames there are. You can also control the duration of any individual frame. So what we're going to do for idle, if you remember, we had 8 frames in our idle animation. We're going to come over to the keyframes column, and we're just going to add 8 entries. Let me zoom the viewport back pretty far, actually. All right, so next to keyframes, we'll just click the plus button until it reads 8 elements. And we will jump over here to our sprites folder, and let's just narrow this down. Let's just search for idle. There we go. And we'll just drag this in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You know, if I named these sprites on a 0-based system, then all the names would line up. Somewhere there's a programmer, and I probably know his name, who's chuckling at that. So anyway, so now we've got our little idle. It's playing back at 15 frames a second. That looks a little fast, so let's cut that back to about 10. He's breathing like really hard. But that'll do for now. So there we go. Now, there's a couple of things. You'll notice that our character is, his feet are kind of moving up and down a little bit. If you were feeling really, I guess, particular about the placement of your sprites, you could go fix that on a sprite-by-sprite basis just by adjusting that sample region. I'm not too worried about it. So we'll go ahead and just leave it kind of like it is, enough to get things rolling. So with that, we can go ahead and close. Let's go over to our flipbooks, and I'll right-click and save that. And let's make our run flipbook. So actually, let me set my view options back over to tiles. I think that's what people are most used to seeing. And you can actually see that we can preview the animation right here in the content browser, which is pretty cool. So let's right-click and go back to animation. We will make a new sprite flipbook. This one we will call Run Flipbook. And again, it has no frames in it. Let's go ahead and jump over to our sprites folder. And this time, we're going to click plus until we see that there are 16 elements. And let's go ahead and filter our content browser by run. and just drag and drop into the appropriate slots. This is the exciting part. And number 16. And there we go. So now we can see that our character is running. Now I did mention you could change the duration of any given frame. You can do that just by dragging the little time slider down here in the bottom. So right now we've got frame 5 just kind of extending out. But we're going to leave that just like it was. Okay, now currently he is running at a whopping 15 frames a second. We'll go ahead and leave that just as it is for now. Now I'm curious about something. Sometimes these sorts of things slip past me, but at this time, if I select multiple sprites, I don't have like an instantly create flipbook option, which I gotta admit, that would be pretty cool. If there's one there, I just haven't seen it yet, but this is a pretty new experimental feature, so I guess that kind of thing could happen. I'll put in a feature request. Okay, so let's save this flipbook and we can close. We now have all of our sprites and all of our flipbooks ready for our character to be able to idle and run. We could go ahead and set up the jump now, but we'll do that a little bit later because it's a really quick task. We'll just make that a part of setting up a jump, which is not going to be even available in our character blueprint at first. That's actually going to wrap up things for this video. In the next video, we will start actually creating the character blueprint for our 2D character.